great big beautiful welcome from the Museum of Native American History and Northwest Arkansas in Bentonville, Arkansas. I'm Charlotte Buchanan Yale. I'm the director of the Museum of Native American History. And our presentations are my favorite thing in the world to do. I love my job because I get to braid time. We always want to honor the first people of our land here, the Quapaw, the Caddo, and the Osage. But what we do at the museum is we're an art museum that shares the diversity and artistry of the first people from all of the Americas. But what we're going to do today, we always hope that honors the people who have gone before us and we inspire those future generations. Today is the last event on our Women's Herstory Month. And our presenter that I don't want to take up very much of her time, is just a very important member of our museum family. She's an author. She is one fabulous history teacher because I watch eyes light up in her classrooms, and I just want to be curious and learn more. She is author of a book that we worked with the Fayetteville Library last week, Diné Women in Medicine and Healing Through Generations. And I also have her other book here, The Earth Memory Compass. We want to say that there will be a Q&A at the end. And from my heart, I always want to welcome the beautiful Dr. Farina King.
Thank you, Charlotte. Wado. So the book that we just saw each other in Fayetteville last week, and I was so glad that Charlotte came out and we had a wonderful conversation after that. That was a book I co-authored with doctors Michael Taylor and Jane Swenson, titled Returning Home, Diné Creative Works from the Intermountain Indian School. So that's out through the University of Arizona Press. So we're excited about that and I appreciate all the great conversations that I've had with MONAH, with Charlotte, and the wonderful team and great people affiliated there that Charlotte and MONAH brings together. So thank you again for inviting me, joining us for these conversations. And I, of course, acknowledge where I'm coming from. Behind me, you see, I am, how do we explain myself? In Navajo, we introduce ourselves by our clans, and it really situates where we're coming from and how we're related to different people, different clans. It calls out to our relatives. So I share that, to start off. That also helps explain where my origins are, that family history, where we're coming from. So in that way, I also share often that I was born in Tonanez-Dize, Tuba City, Diné Bikeya, Navajo country, as you see a picture of behind me of actually Sebi in the sky, Monument Valley, that is famous and iconic by a lot of Western films, but has always been indigenous land, since time immemorial, which I will have a lot of highlights and conversation aspects of that in today's talk with you all. But what you can't see, with the virtual background is I'm actually in Cherokee Nation right now, Tahlequah, which is the homelands of the Cherokee Nation and the United Keetoowah Band of Cherokees. And as Charlotte shared, I'm a professor at a university, Northeastern State University, which was originally founded by the Cherokee as a Cherokee National Female Seminary. So I often like to share the history of these incredible Cherokee women who pursued education, went on to become leaders in their communities, real grassroots movement, but also some went on to PhDs and medical degrees and all kinds of work doing really important service and paving a way for communities. And that's a lot of what I'm talking about today with you from Diné Bikeya, Navajo country, that I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And as I'll say in Navajo, here is I'll explain that we are matrilineal, so we recognize our mothers, and that's something I'll bring up again in this conversation. So I recognize my own mother, that she is English American of white settler descent from Michigan. And then we say I'm born for my father's mothers, and their clans are the Towering House and Black Streaked Woods people clans. And that's what makes me a Diné, as Navajos call ourselves, Diné woman. And that I was born in Tuba City, because that's something we also consider is where your umbilical cord's buried, where will you always have that attachment to homeland. So this is how we introduce ourselves in Diné. She'e belagana nishle, do kia ani bashish chin, belagana dashache, do sinijini dashanale, akot ego sa nishle, tonanes dizete shidishche. So that's what I just shared with you. I am going to share my screen, the thing we say when we meet virtually. And I'm glad, that we can meet virtually, but always excited to connect with people whenever we can, and coming to Bentonville, to MONAH when I can. And these ancestral homelands of not only all the peoples who were forcibly removed, from their homelands and having to start anew in new places, but recognizing that there have always been indigenous peoples in these spaces like Osage, Caddo, Quapaw, all these diverse peoples and movements and convergences of them. So that's something I'm going to talk about with you today, is focusing on indigenous peoples, but specifically indigenous women of my ancestors and my relatives, Diné women as healers through generations. And thinking about a lot of my work has been very personally tied to my own family history, family stories. And that's, why I'm beginning with even my own grandmothers, which is through my father, who are Diné, and ancestors and warriors, and what we mean by that in terms of healing. And so I know medicine is a big part of how we think of healing, and especially medical areas, but we're going to really stretch our minds and think about healers in a broader sense. And as I shared before, what's really been an inspiration for me and passion drive is my family stories, kinship stories, and that I come from a family of healers. And I was very fortunate and appreciate having a conversation not that long ago with MONAH and Charlotte with my father, as Diné Shajee, and my father is Dr. Phil Smith. He is the son of, my Shanale, my paternal grandparents, Red Smith in English and Johanna Haskoutsi, pictured together there. And this is an art piece that was done by my niece, my father's granddaughter, Leah Tiare Smith, in the thick of the pandemic around 2020. When my father was practicing as a family practice physician for the Utah Navajo health system in a small clinic in Monument Valley, really in this heartland of homeland of Diné Bikeya, a very rural area, doesn't have at the time, a stoplight, and families really spread out in that Navajo country. And then COVID-19 outbreaks hit and really are devastating with the impact they had on Diné. So I'm living in Tahlequah at the time, and just really so anxious and worried about, of course, all my Diné relatives and people, and my father on the front lines in many ways as a physician, and already at that time, over 70 years old. So very, of a vulnerable population. And it really turned me towards my ancestors, and to also think about how Diné have faced such monsters, challenges and struggles, particularly with health issues, well-being, questions of well-being and survival through generations. And my two grandparents, my grandfather, Nali Hastin, he was a ancestral healer, Hatafle, as we say in Navajo, or some might know them as medicine man, herbalist, all kinds of language, of referring to them. But in Diné, we say Hatafle. And so my grandfather would show and was trying to teach my father some of those ceremonies and practices and knowledge, and preparing him for that. Both my grandparents passed away due to cancer, which is another part of this story, thinking about when we're thinking about these recent outbreaks of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Why are these Diné communities so susceptible? There's various reasons, various facets to the struggles. And one is also keeping in mind and knowing that cancer is very prevalent, and diabetes and these other issues of being immunocompromised, having compromised immune systems. And my father had been working already with Native American health through the Indian Health Service for 30 years or so. And so I grew up, with that consciousness of Indian health issues as the terms go, legally. And my dad doing all this kind of research and working with tribal nations throughout the country in the United States. And so I developed a open syllabus trying to bring attention to understanding why COVID-19 and these struggles are so devastating and impactful among Diné, and what are the Diné responses and efforts to address them and to survive and to thrive, as a people. And this is something that I've thought about, is not only, knowing that my grandfather was Hatafle, but also knowing that my grandfathers, my dad's grandfather were Hatafle. And he knew that, and having that tradition. But that was very, again, focused on male, like on the men, right? And so then with this conversation, I'm really excited, and I'm working on a book based off of those efforts to contextualize and historicize the impacts of COVID-19, looking at Diné healing through generations. It's not just male focused. Women are essential and important healers in all these histories, and the present day, into the present day, of course. So I thought about my grandmother. So often when I talk about Diné doctor, I thought about my dad. I thought about Hatafle, male ancestors like my Nali Hastin, but then I turned to my Nali Atsa and thought about her stories and how, I wish I could have known her better, both my grandparents, but they passed away when I was very young, or my grandfather passed away before I was born due to cancer. So then I thought a lot about these cancer stories, and my grandmother's story, a little understanding about that more, and some of my other matriarchs in my family, and want to share with you this entryway into some of the other connections that I hope to talk about with how Diné Woman Healers traces back to our origins and our empowering stories, origin narratives, and teachings, and is a central part of all this. And then also looking at Diné women as warriors is really meant in also a healing sense, not just like fighting, though we use that language in medicine as well, fighting cancer, for example. So those are what I'll share with you. But talking about cancer stories and thinking about my grandmother and really feeling I can't help but feel sadness, that feeling when I try to remember her. I wish I was one, and that I lost her, feeling that loss to cancer when she was really, I think, too young to go. And trying to understand that, and then learning later about how my family were down the road from one of the worst uranium mill spills in American history that hardly anyone knows about, the Church Rock uranium mill spill in 1979, or knowing that they were digging uranium in those areas. It's really painful, and still a lot that I'm trying to understand. But fortunately, it's not only my father who has influenced me and the stories of my grandparents, who I did not get to know personally, but as you see here, this is my aunt, Shema, here, as we call our aunts mothers, Shema, like mother. And my aunt Phyllis, who I joke is very much like a twin, a female twin of my father. She also, like many of my other relatives, have had to face cancer, have had cancer, and have had to face it. And I am so grateful that she is a survivor of cancer, and kind of seeing her as this beautiful legacy of my grandmother is so powerful. And also reflecting more and thinking about how my female relatives, women in my life, have really been so important in my sense of identity and well-being and health and healing, and seeing them and recognizing them and listening to them being so crucial and such an important foundation. So this is a recent image done of my aunt Phyllis Smith, Diné, for the Indigene podcast, a really awesome podcast I strongly recommend, that looks at questions of women, areas of women, Indigenous women in health. And she was a recent featured guest with her son, my cousin, bro, Tyson King. And Phyllis has really become an educator through being a breast cancer survivor and a patient advocate. And in that way, I see her as such an important healer, with the work that she's doing, but just what she's doing, work or whatever, how she's being there and being supportive. So these are just some of my favorite quotes that were included in the podcast. And I have that link for you at the bottom. I hope you can see it there. I tried to use a shortened URL to make it easier for people. But things that Phyllis brought to light, and I included from this podcast, but of course, like in my interactions, I was also fortunate and very blessed to be able to connect with my aunties over phone, over Zoom meetings, virtually, and also ask them about how they're facing the pandemic, what they're going through, and all what we could, to stay in touch, though it has been such a very difficult time, for everyone, understanding upfront how vulnerable we all are, how we are all mortal, and what that means. But something, as you see here, that Phyllis noted, is in Navajo, cancer is known as the sore that never heals. And she became an advocate, starting to talk to other Diné women, especially, facing breast cancer and fighting that, and trying to help them to reconceptualize it, to think of it as it is a damaged cell in your body. It has been damaged, and that's where the cancer begins, and there's treatment for it. Because even for her, she was really afraid, when she heard that's how Diné call it, the sore that never heals, that there would never be healing. And she had all that fear, but had the support of family, and, just as she shares, really the hope always of, she wants to live and has a lot to live for, and keeping herself busy and her mind busy. So that's why she also emphasized doing something, anything. For her, it was knitting, right? And it's been really cool, knitting or different fiber art. That's a term I've heard more recently that some might call it arts and crafts, but fiber art is an activism in its own way. And we've especially seen that in women's marches, with the kind of different hats and things women have worn and made, themselves, which is really powerful. And so she goes out and is really just trying to inspire people of, I'm here, you can make it, and being that, community, calling forth a community and being a voice of survival, and that you want it and start there, with that mindset was really very powerful. And I see that especially, with recognizing the influence that she's had on our family and her children. And I include this quote because it'll come back around to my grandmother, Johanna. This is other areas where her son Tyson, he said other things like we have to want to survive, how to get through, COVID-19 and really be there for each other and support each other through these challenges. But he also recently visited the Albuquerque Indian boarding school where my grandmother, Johanna Haskoutsi, went. And so he was reflecting on that and shared this with me and others through Facebook, social media platforms, a lot of sharing and connecting with people these days, where he said, my existence as a Diné, as a Kia'ani from Sundance Coal Mine Road was because of my grandma Johanna's strength, because of her resilience, because of her desire to return to her homelands. How she survived, how she persevered to return home, I will never know. And I think, it's not only her, right? It's through the matriarchs. It's through that matrilineal line of also his mother wanting to survive, being there for other people and telling them how important it is, to do what is good for your health and well-being, and that you're wanted, you're needed. That is also inspiring, for all. And coming back, to my grandma, Johanna Lucille Haskoutsi, Shanaliatza, and her strength, being such an inspiration. Here's an image of her as a young woman. My dad would talk about how women in his family were so great at riding horses and taking care of them. So just hearing the stories have been really inspiring for me. And I just encourage anyone, no matter who you are, recognizing the women who, as healers in your families and your communities around you. And that is a picture on the left of my great grandmother. Johanna had the same name as her mother, Johanna Haskoutsi. And a picture of her that was in a little news clipping when she was over 100 years old. So that's also, for me, was a bit heartbreaking in many ways of my grandmother died, pretty young. I would say, yes, young compared to her mother. Her mother lived to over 100 years old, 102 or so. And my father would mention that. And among Diné, there's teachings of Sa Nagai Bik'e Hajon, which I'll talk about. And in different presentations and conversations I've had with people before, walk in beauty, Sa Nagai Bik'e Hajon, I've tried to explain it's not just beauty in a superficial sense, but harmony, balance in all things, relationships all around us, as Diné say, in prayer and mindset, beauty before me, beauty behind me, below me, above me, all around me, within me, and seeking to restore beauty, hajo. Some pronounce it wojo, seeking to restore that when there's imbalance, disorder, and health challenges, issues like that are always that. So these are teachings that are the name matriarchs in my family, the Johanna Haskoutsi, my great grandmother, and my grandmother, Johanna Lucille Haskoutsi, had. But in years, that and generations of what they faced, they were introduced processed foods, making fry bread every day, uranium mining that contaminates clean water sources that are already very scarce, and the lack of access to clean water, and then eventually technologies being introduced like electricity and all these kind of technologies and changes that we're dependent on. Still, Diné, they do not have access to that. Many do not have access to that to the extent of other communities. So for me, it's just that also hard comparison of the generations, what's happened from the time that even Johanna, what my great grandmother Johanna faced as her family, they have memories and they are survivors of the Long Walk, which was the forced removal of Diné through a scorched earth campaign pushed by the United States military. And to be honest, complicit bystanders and settlers who pushed for that, of dispossessing Diné from their lands, trying to force them on a death march and to a death camp, where they were interned. And they don't use these terms, they use reservation or such, but they were in a place where it was not viable. It was not easy to survive there. I mean, so much against them that scholars like Jennifer Dennett-Dale, one of the first, if not the first Diné to receive a PhD in history, has written about, and different scholars have talked about. And, Johanna Haskowski, my great grandmother, her parents and her relatives, they had direct memories of that. So it's quite amazing. Diné believe living a long life is to 100 and over. So here's some close images of them. Where this kind of comes back to also the connections with Diné woman healers is, I thought about this a lot recently, is when I was doing research about Diné boarding school experiences, I was looking at the National Archives in Denver. And when I was there, I saw that they had records of the Albuquerque Indian School, the place that I told you my cousin Tyson went to visit, and he was reflecting on how my grandmother Johanna Haskowski went there. And there's been more brought to media attention, but these are what many families have carried the weight of the abuses, the hardships and tragedies and horrors in some cases of these mechanics and what I see as an apparatus of colonizing machines, assimilationist boarding schools that were designed to kill the Indian in them, save the man, especially in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And my grandmother, Johanna Haskowski, went to school in the 1930s. So at a different era of that, but they were still really pushing assimilation and sanitizing indigeneity, what it meant to be Diné, and the students' experiences there. So my grandmother, Johanna, she went to Albuquerque Indian School, as you picture it here. This is a picture from the late 1800s. So it was before the time my grandmother went, but it kind of gives you an idea of the place. And she went since her older sister, Christine Haskowski, went before her and encouraged her to come, helped to connect her with, the proper paperwork application to get over there. So they actually, it wasn't the children were stolen, as some were actually, in some cases they were. Some, signed up for it and saw an opportunity in going to these schools, though they were pushing assimilation and these different aspects. So I got to actually see the paperwork of my grandmother applying to this school, and some of her paperwork from her time at the school. And this is from the records of my grandmother. And that just was really powerful for me, because I just didn't have a lot of access to anything, from that my grandmother has left, in this world. And I saw her handwriting here, as you can see. And they asked the students, like this is a survey for the students, and they asked them, indicate, what kind of trade or vocation you want. And you can look at all these different options. They're pushing them into blue collar work, right? Really a lot of manual labor, electricity, landscape gardening. For women, it was a push in what was seen as domesticity, cooking, childcare, these kind of things. And you don't see doctor, you don't see nursing, or lawyer, or these other kind of professions. But my grandmother, Nali, she wrote, I would like to be a nurse and would like to go on to training school. And that to me was just really powerful. She did not go on to become a nurse. She became pregnant pretty young, left school, and had an arranged marriage to my grandfather, and she had many children. My dad is the youngest, and she also my grandfather already had other children. That it was a connected family in that way. So she did not become a nurse as she showed that interest, but her sister did, who had, it's really interesting in terms of sisters. I have 4 sisters, and we're compared all the time. I have a sister who's about a year younger than me, and Johanna was about a year younger than her older sister, Christine. And we're compared, different times. And even in the records, they're comparing my grandmother to her sister, much the same sort of girl her sister Christine is, but younger and not so well developed in character, right? They're judging them and the way they're labeling them. And this is a picture of my great aunt, Christine Haskowski Martin is her married name. And she went on finishing, a lot of her schooling that she needed at Albuquerque Indian School, and went to this Sage Memorial nursing school in Ganado. And sorry, the pictures are not the best. And she was among the class of some of these first trained Diné nurses. As you see pictured here, this is Charlotte Adele Slivers and others who went on to serve as Diné nurses in different capacities and places in the military. As you see, was Charlotte Adele Slivers. And Chris Kristofic has written a really in-depth study and book about the story of the first Native American nursing school. And this opened in Navajo Nation for Diné women especially, but not only Diné, but other women of different backgrounds, not only Native American women, came to this nursing school on the Navajo reservation in Diné Bikaya. And I read and wrote a review about that. I wish I could go back to it just to give you a little peek, at these key points here, right? So it's really interesting how, there's a lot of negative, terrible abuses of things that happen at boarding school. But then some women use that to navigate and find opportunities to be healers and serve their people and community. Like my aunt, Christine Haskowski Martin, who returns to her home community and is involved, in the health profession as a nurse, working at hospitals among her people and family. And my grandmother, although she didn't get to continue on, she, as I shared this story with my family, my Aunt Phyllis, for example, would say things like, wow, that's why she must have been so supportive of your father. And she taught us a lot of the herbs and their properties, healing properties and such that she knew from her father, a healer, and the different ways of seeing and recognizing my grandmother and my aunt, as healers, and others like Alta Gorman and Charlotte Adele Slivers that Chris Tofik talks about in the book Medicine Woman. Slivers goes on to be a second lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps in World War II. Incredible books that could just be about them. Yeah. Let me go back to watch the time here. Oop, I think I'm jumping ahead. Let's see, to get back in my place. All right. So, as I mentioned before, one major slide here is the stories of and the significance of Diné women as healers, and in central parts, foundations to society, to community, is from the origins, and origin stories such as those of Atsa Nalehi, changing woman, as she's known, a revered Diné deity, but mother, the mother of all our clans, our original mother. And her story of coming to womanhood, which becomes a model of Kanofta, the female puberty ceremony for young Diné women who have their period menstruate for the first time. And this is an image. I recommend this source that is open online with wonderful illustrations by the artist Nanaba, which is a Diné name, a warrior name, which I'll talk about as well. Nanaba Chacon as a leading illustrator in a short video, only 1 minute, that's linked here, where I found some of these images, the illustrations from Nanaba Chacon of the story of changing woman. And it just gives you that brief insight to it, that, as a baby, she is found by first man and first woman. She grows to become a woman, and she is the one to model, kanotha, of how important when women menstruate for the first time, that the community recognizes that, not in shame, not something to hide, but one of entering womanhood and the strength of woman and all the different aspects of that. And there's other really great resources to introduce what Kanotha is about. A film by Lena Carr called Kanotha, that I strongly recommend and include those references and links to. And this was a photo available online, shared by an anthropologist who I respect his work, Gary Witherspoon, married a Diné woman and really strongly connected to Diné community, but an image of a young Diné woman having part of the Kanotha is running towards the east, showing that strength, and perseverance that women have, and modeled after changing woman and her story of coming to womanhood, and that she would have 2 children who became the twin heroes with the sun. And the twin heroes would grow and they would fight monsters that plagued the people, as depicted here in this image. And they fight off these monsters, but the story as it goes, and there's been more attention to this in the way that Diné have been talking about disease and the pandemic, is the twins left some of the monsters to remain, including illness, or as some have even referred to uranium, these different ills that plague humanity. And we are following in the tradition and the legacy of our ancestors, facing them as these heroes ourselves in our own stories. But as her children grew up, changing woman then became lonely, as the story goes, right? As we hear in our ancestors, as they say, and she creates the clans and more people, and we are her her children, and we always recognize that white shell woman. And so in that legacy, this is what Diné women carry is not only, motherhood as all the connotations of care, nurturing, of the foundation, origins, aspects of that, but healers also are warriors. And what I find is so beautiful and interconnected in all this, as I mentioned, Nanaba's name, the Ba, as from Na Ba He, refers to warrior, the idea, a sense of warrior. And according to Diné ancestral practices, we name our women with that in their names, the way we call them, they are already seen as warriors. And yet, warrior is a term that has been hyper masculinized, hyper affiliated with men and, masculinity, all these different aspects of that. But to Diné, what warriorhood means is a key part of it is the ability to heal and fight disease and other threats, that ills that harm people. And that's something I share of this link from a really well done piece open online to people by Dr. Lloyd Lee, Decolonizing the Navajo Nation, the lessons of the Nabahi. And so traditionally, through ancestral practices, a lot of Diné women have the Nanaba and Nidiba, Adesba, Yanaba. These are all women Diné names, and they have Ba to indicate warrior. And they were really important as well in different ceremonies of healing aspects. So I want to wrap up with just quickly, having these shout outs, highlights. I mean, there could be a talk just about any of these individual women, but I will do that. And all this, the women who I will highlight, who are these Diné warriors through generations and healers of the healing aspect of that warriorhood, they are matriarchs, and how important matriarchs are to Diné and our ancestral teachings, as shared with Changing Woman and White Shell Woman and that story. That I asked for permission from a friend of mine, an artist, Diné artist, Tyrone Whitehorse, and he shared on Facebook his work. He sometimes shares it in this painting called The Matriarch. And I thought that he really encapsulates well, similar to my cousin Tyson's words. And what I'm going to kind of give you this montage of examples, and only it's so many others. I cannot name all these incredible women leaders, Diné women healers in all these different areas. But as he says, Diné culture is matriarchal, based on the females of our family. It is from them we receive life and first experience love. From them we receive invaluable teachings that prepare us for life. It is to them we know we can turn to when we feel sad, lonely, overwhelmed, stressed, or any myriad of emotions or troubles, knowing we will find a loving shoulder and arms where we'll hear the comforting kinship terms of Shayaj, my little one, Shanale, my grandchild, term from paternal grandmother, Shitsoke, my grandchild, term from maternal grandmother, words that bring healing to our souls. It is from them we will always find home. It was for them I painted this scene. Often we found their words of love, reassurance, rebuke, and teachings by the fireside. From them emanates creation. From them comes our souls. Ahyehet shama, do shama sane, do shanale, do shama yaje, do shabijhe, ayo anishne. And that's, thank you to mother, grandmothers, aunties. I love you. And these are some images, even to give you a sense of 1800s, all kinds of generations. This is an image that was shared not that long ago on Facebook of Atsa Yistle, a Diné woman warrior and sister of Chief Mariano. And there's more information about her, but this is a very special image because not much remains of actual women who fought alongside men in struggles and times of challenges of their time. Kind of emphasize that. This is an image from one of my students prepared, Jenna Todd, and I received her permission to share. She created a beautiful design of an exhibit about the medical accomplishments of Annie Dodge Wanika, who is one of the first Diné councilwoman, not the first, like one of the first also was Lilikai Neal, but Annie Dodge Wanika became really known for being a public health advocate among Diné. And as Jenna highlighted here, and I share a link to her exhibit label under my Diné Doctor open syllabus, Wanika became chair of Health and Welfare Committee, and she emphasizes how she really came to know the people, build trust, and seek ways of healing and confronting terrible diseases like tuberculosis that were plaguing her people. And there's stories of how she was a survivor of the 1918 pandemic, and that inspired her to really support her people facing health issues and challenges. And a big way I know that she did that was helping with translating medical terms in Diné Bazad, in Navajo language, and how important, all these roles are. Haley Laughter, there was, through that same link, it's I think it's the JZZ was the link. It's an online group, a media through Phoenix. They did features of, it's called like a Changing Woman series, and features of incredible Diné woman leaders and important influencers, examples of trailblazers paving the way. And Haley Laughter was identified as a healer through that series. And a main area that she has led in and has a strong social media presence and presence online is founding the Hajo Total Wellness and really pushing for native inspired yoga, and how yoga is such an important way and different ways of bringing together Diné ancestral teachings with other, cultural practices of health and well-being, which is just really exciting, the work she's doing. And then, of course, recognizing that there are, as most people think of medicine, doctors, surgeons, there are Diné women who have been paving a way and really pushing through blocks, that have really blocked out, as you saw, the challenges, the roadblocks that people of color, as they're known, or historically marginalized people, have been excluded from the professional fields of medicine and health. And individuals such as Lori Arviso Alvord, how she became the first Diné woman surgeon, and has this widely read book that she wrote together with a co-author, Elizabeth Cohen Van Pelt, The Scalpel and the Silver Bear. And looking even at, the book that I have with me, I think what was really powerful that she mentioned in her book on page 2 from the beginning is she said, "I have come to understand after years of reflection that my tribe has knowledge about medicine and healing, ways of thinking about health and illness that provide solutions to some of modern medicine's most daunting problems." So it also is important how, I'm moving it, how her work is bridging, different ways of knowing and knowledge and medicine. that would have been a picture of her, but no worries. And then there's all these great resources online that have been spearheaded and really led by Diné Women podcasts like this one of Navajo Nation Healthy Ke. And Ke is the word for kinship and family, kind of bringing that together, and the emphasis on maternal and child health. And these are online. And then, as we've seen in the COVID-19 pandemic, women have been major leaders, organizers, activists on the, grassroots movements that they have been leading on all these levels of involvement. And Ethel Branch, along with a group of others, especially women organizers, came together, started this Navajo and Hopi families COVID-19 relief fund, for example, that has raised millions of dollars in support for Diné health and well-being through these very, very challenging times, as I mentioned. And here's an image of Ethel Branch and Shondine Herrera, who has been a mentee of Ethel's, the mentorship, the kind of support Diné Women provide each other in leading and being examples in all these kinds of work, and just the service, serving, going out there and helping people, as this link to a story also features. And I want to also share a shout out to my own sister, my mother as well, the women very close to me who have always been such inspiration to me. Of not waiting, just going out and doing and serving. And it's in a way funny because I remember my uncle and auntie, Albert and Helen. My Aunt Helen just always opened her house to me, the love, the welcome, a refuge, that having a space of healing and being someone there, for people. And they fostered many children together. And when my aunt passed away, I said to my uncle, what can I do? How can I help you? And he snapped at me and he said, he basically was like, you don't ask that. You just do it. You do it, and that's such an example of so many women who they don't ask. They just go and do. They see that need. They listen, they're listening. They're feeling out what is the need. They know. And my sister, Heather Tanana, she organized this Utah tribal COVID-19 relief and helped to fundraise funding and work with like pilots who had private planes to go do drop-offs. And I was very blessed to be invited to help with that and the delivery to Navajo clinics during, the thick and the real hard hit times of the pandemic before the vaccine was there. And it was so scary and rampant. And the people we lost, during that time, including my Aunt Florence, another beloved matriarch in our family who has just healed and cared for so many through her love and care. So these are my stories I share with you. And I thank you so much for listening and joining me, and hope that we all, open our eyes and recognize the healers among us, the healing capabilities of ourselves, how important it is in our own mindset to be of a good mind, of that hope and positivity, not toxic positivity, recognizing and facing hard realities and struggles, but then, pulling up the sleeves and getting at it like so many of these incredible women. Atsa, phenomenal, as we say in Diné, Atsa. We recognize you, we see you, and thank you, and you inspire so many of us.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Evan? Because I have one.
Go ahead, please.
Farina, I was so glad, to see the book, The Scalpel and the Silver Bear that you put up because, with so much COVID and so many cancers and all of that, as well as, that book and Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, it's the idea of going into the Western sciences of something, but also having that rubber band pull you back to traditional knowledge. And that's one of the things that I do love about the word indigenuity that Dan Wildcat has coined, and you and your son and your father were part of indigenuity, is building on that traditional knowledge. And, I'm so glad to see that book that you had out.
Thank you. I mean, it's really neat too to know how closely Diné are related and how we connect and what she wrote, of also getting into and explaining the significance of Sanagai B'Kehajon and those teachings of walk in beauty coming in her work. And then I would talk to some family about it and some who have lived in the Crown Point area where her family's from. They're like, oh yeah, I knew Lori. I went to school with her and all this stuff, to know that there are an incredible women physicians out there and really inspiring with the work that they've done. Like I've just learned about more about Dr. Patricia Nez Henderson, who was the first Diné woman to graduate from Yale Medical School, and the incredible work that she's doing in webinars about her and her work. Also in the sciences, Dr. Carletta Chief, who has been bringing attention to water contamination and those issues. She's an affiliate with the University of Arizona. Dr. Janie Ingram, affiliated with Northern Arizona, and that similar kind of work of there's different areas of healing and work that needs to happen with healing. And that's what I think is so amazing in all this, and including, the work, as I mentioned, of Dr. Jennifer Danette Dale, who has worked with human rights commissions and, seeing these hardships of our people, what they're facing of human made harms, that we need to stop and heal from and move, rectify, move in a positive direction.
Exactly. One of the things I also like to bring up is on it's our service to create a platform for conversation, a platform for listening, but also, we're always so grateful that you shared, with your class and on our website, Native American Historic Women Trailblazers, and especially for this month, that's always on the website, and we want to keep adding to that. And, again, it's always our service. And I want to say one last thing is when we were in Fayetteville and I was kind of blew the beginning of this, is that it really, the book Returning Home, Diné Creative Works from the Intermountain Indian School, is so moving. And that's the third leg of what we do here, blending the past, present, and future, because history is not about shaming. History is about empathy. History is about, hopefully we keep going forward and there's never light extinguished from any child's eyes.
And I'm grateful you said that. There's one thing I was reminded about is what you just shared of empathy. It's also recognizing our connections, that we forget, because that's why I love history, is I was too young to know my grandmother. So I get to know her through my aunts, and my father. And it's talking to them and just starting to draw the connections and searching, for those connections that are really powerful. And even just recently, you might have noticed a lot of women in those pictures, including me today, we wear this floral design scarf. And this is what Diné have called, they call it Masani, Shamasani scarf, like the grandmother scarf is what they call it. And many of our shumasane, our maternal grandmothers, is that term, would wear this scarf. They would wrap it around their head, and have this floral design, and it like tie it around, and that's how they were. It's so awesome. And you saw a lot of the women who I pictured, they wear this scarf. It's a sign of that being a matriarch, like a sign of supporting, also upholding matriarchs and recognizing them. And I thought, where did this come from? Like what, Diné didn't have these kind of flowers, in Diné Bikaya, not this kind of design. And I wondered that for the longest time. And then when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started happening, it has been brought, women and different folks have started to wear the Shumasane scarves in solidarity with Ukraine, because there was conversation about how Ukrainian grandmothers introduced these scarves to Indigenous women in First Nations communities of now, present day Canada area. And then it became called a kokom, I think is how you pronounce it, scarf. And then it just spread, among Indigenous communities into Diné Bikaya, and Diné Women embrace this as a sign of solidarity, of womanhood and matriarchy and of matriarchs. And to me, it's, beautiful now that Diné women are wearing it in solidarity and support for Ukraine and what's happening. So, it's just amazing, this connectivity of recognizing people, standing with each other through very hard times and what they're facing and struggles, especially as Indigenous people, as I shared, understanding stories of scorched earth, being the targets of scorched earth campaigns and war and violence and dispossession and challenges of fights over sovereignty and all these aspects is something Indigenous people certainly understand through our stories, through our experiences. So I wanted to share that. Thank you for mentioning the importance of empathy and seeing that connection in our humanity.
Well, my friend, if you don't laugh and cry with each other, I don't know, that's power right there. That you move me to tears also, and that I always look forward to embrace you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm in solidarity with Ukraine too. So
thank you. There it is.
Thank you again. I will see you here in the museum. Is there anything else, Evan, on your end of the world that we're...
I'll just chime in and say there's a lot of people just thanking you for the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We did have somebody comment when you were showing handwriting, and also thought it was very interesting. Like, what is that experience like for you when you first discover something like that? It's almost like a time machine, right? It just this thing, it's got so much history and story behind it. What is the experience like when you first discover something like that?
Well, I just, want to cry. Like, it's a really powerful moments in the archives of, having something that even I've shared with my family, and right now, another important healer is Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, Laguna Pueblo woman, and, the first to break the mold, the constraints in that position, and entering that space and launching a federal Indian boarding school truth initiative of just even recognizing what the federal government has in these records and how, it's quite inaccessible to the families of a lot of my family didn't even know, there's these records, or that grandmother's things are there, or what they have. They have photos, they have all these different things. So I think, it's opening up a lot, and it's going to be hard. This is where healing is going to be so important. And we can look at the First Nations in Canada and all their commissions and efforts and aspects. And yet, it was in Canada where all this viral news about the unmarked mass graves of children were, and the shock there, even after they had initiated these commissions on truth, healing, and reconciliation, all these different areas, and even reparations and these different things. And then they find out that, in the US, we are so behind. We have so much, to do, and just even acknowledging and having a conversation about that. And even for our own people, like for me, I didn't know that was there. I just thought, wow, okay, there's all these other student records. Is my grandmother's records going to be here? Could they be? And it was like finding a lost treasure, of wow, she is here. And I was able to learn that she had a dream of maybe being a nurse, that she had that, and she didn't get to live it herself. Her sister in a way did, which is very interesting, but she lived a very full life, like she did so much in her life of raising so many children at 8, like all these kids, and they went on and have done incredible things with their families, and all the work that she did, a weaver, and the beautiful works and different things. Like I'm learning more about her, and that's just what's really exciting. It was very exciting for me, and tells me why, this work that also Deb Holland's doing, it's just even us having to uncover, like so much was buried, and yet learning how to do that as much as we can with respect and with care, because that can also be done very harmfully. And it has been, including by scholars, actually notoriously grave digging, or, turning really nasty and harmful, where people have it's been extractive. And how do we do this in a way of working with Indigenous communities and not being extractive, but, respecting their protocols, Indigenous protocols, and, ways of learning and sharing. That's going to take a lot of effort, but that's, again, get into it, like try the best, live and learn, be humble when we make mistakes, and say, I'm sorry when we need to, and learn from those mistakes. That's really the best. We are doing the best we can, or try, at least when we first, enter that awareness, and then saying, I'm going to do something. I'm going to try to do something, what I can do. So yeah, that was really powerful and inspiring for me. And I'm grateful. And the crazy thing is there's still more. There's more I know to find. And I recently spoke at the Rehoboth Christian Mission School. And that's where my grandmother went, and a lot of my family went before they went to federal boarding schools. There's a heavy emphasis in Canada on like Christian denominational schools, because a lot of the residential schools, that's their term for boarding schools, they were denominational, run by, these different religious groups or churches. In the United States, we also have a number of denominational boarding schools that were these assimilationist schools too. And Rehoboth was another one. And I recently was able to go speak there, and they're working on, understanding and organizing their archives, and then how to handle this approach it, with respect, and delving into the legacy and history of their past, with trying to seek, a positive future. So I'm hoping to support, different groups with like that, especially since my grandmother went there, my uncle, my aunties, I have family tied to these places too. So I know there's a lot more work to be done. And that's what that brought awareness to as well. Tip of the iceberg. That's always important.
Yeah.
It looks like the last comment here, and I thought also it was very interesting. When I first read warrior healer, my brain it's like, well, that's contradicting words, but that was very interesting because, like, I don't know, I think of maybe a traditional healer, maybe we're more like a passive role. It's like, no, warrior, it's a very active role, and yeah, people do depend on them to lead them through their sickness and everything. we had somebody comment just they love how you highlighted of how the Diné women are warriors and are raised as warriors. She said, "We have so much power, grace, and beauty. Many blessings to you and your family."
Oh,
So,
thank you. Yeah, it
thank
was
you.
really eye-opening to me because we only got this hyper machismo, macho man warrior idea. And we thought, okay, maybe Amazon, women warriors. But then I read a book by, it was Big Horse, the Warrior, and it was written by his daughter. His daughter wrote it, which was also really powerful. She was the one listening to her father's stories and writing them down. And Big Horse taught her that what a warrior means is, he said, it was worded so beautifully, but I'm going to do the best to paraphrase it. But he basically said, a really long, a longer, fuller definition of a warrior. And what it was, the warrior will get the wood when we're cold. They will go out and get the wood. They will care for the sick. They will remind the people we are family. They will bring the people together. So it was really eye-opening of how the warrior is someone who is putting their neck out there, for others. That's what I really sensed about it.
Great. Well, that's all that I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you always. Thank you. The warrior's service and humble to beauty.
Thank you.
I look forward to, I just get out of the museum and we talk about anything we want to. Both of Farina's books are in the museum, or the next one will be next week. Talking about mothers and healing. April is dedicated to healing our Mother Earth. It's Earth Month for us, from storyteller Chuna McIntyre, who is Alaskan storyteller, to do Earth stories. We have the fabulous kitchen curandera Felicia Ruiz in the house with her new book, Earth Medicines. And we've joined hands with Feeding America. So quarterly, the museum will host Indigenous chefs, and that will be on that weekend of Earth Day also, with Cherokee chef Nico Albert. And we've got a lot of other things planned.
That is exciting.
I know, you need to come.
I know, I'm going to have to come by. This sounds great.
Okay. Well, as always, our service, to create these conversations. Never stop learning. History starts at home. Go walk in beauty and be kind. Travel well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.